Hey there, my name is Pam, and today I'm going to show you how to make this DIY Resin Tesseract Lamp to illuminate your space. Like all good ideas, this project involves a little bit of planning, some basic resin pouring skills, soldering skills, nunchuck skills, woodworking skills, and ample swearing when something doesn't work out. Seriously though, my friends, if I can make this super cool space-age Tesseract lamp, then I bet you can too. Step 1. Making the space stone. To begin, you will need the cheapest epoxy resin you can find on Amazon and some fun gem-shaped silicone molds. Because I'm on a budget called I don't get paid to do this, we are going to use food coloring instead of the expensive resin pigments. The resin I purchased did not come with instructions, and since I've never used the stuff before, I played a fun guessing game I like to call deduction. Using evidence I collected from the bottle labels, I deduced the resin needed to be mixed at a 1-to-1 ratio. Thus, using the tiny yet handy mixing cups the resin came with, I mixed equal parts of resin and hardener. Vaguely recalling I should mix it slowly to reduce bubbles as I whipped part A and B together like I was beating eggs. I guesstimated how much food coloring to add and relied heavily on the "yep, that looks good" method. Once satisfied, I poured the resin into my tiny gem molds and waited patiently like a child on Christmas morning to open up my sapphire presents. 2 days later, I squeezed my darlings from their silicone cocoons and marveled at their passing perfection. This would be one of the last moments of happiness during this project for many weeks. Step 2. Illumination. Select a perfect gem or the nearest thing to it. This will be the space stone for your Tesseract. Now take the space stone to your super secret lab. Here we are going to quickly solder a battery pack to a blue LED. LEDs are a fun beginner wiring project. I say this because I am a beginner and I felt like a genius after soldering an LED to a couple of wires. So a quick explanation of what I'm doing here. The red wire is positive and the black is negative. After stripping the wires and slipping heat shrink over them, solder the positive LED wire, which is the longer of the two, to the red wire, and the negative side, which is the shorter of the two, to the black wire. Then slip the heat shrink over the soldered connections and shrink it closed with a lighter. Then pop some batteries into the battery pack and excitedly exclaim for Hall to hear how baller you are. Because you are. Step 3. Insertion. Cool, so you wired an LED. Now take a tiny drill bit, perhaps attached to a Dremel, and drill a hole into the space stone large enough for the LED to sit in. Then glue the LED into the acrylic gem. I tried crazy glue for this, and for whatever reason it didn't work. But I've come here today to tell you about the wonders of hot glue. Yes, it worked, so use that. Step 4. Molding the future. To make the Tesseract mold, you will need some acrylic or plastic at least 4 inches by 4 inches in size. I used acrylic picture frame replacement glass. After some internal deliberation and head scratching, I marked the sheets at 4 inches in length, then scored both sides with my trusty craft knife so I could snap them down to size. Believe it or not, this was my first time making a mold. I mean, it's kind of obvious. One thing I realized was that I couldn't have the glue holding the sides together on the inside of the mold because it would leave an imprint on the resin. So I decided to thickly cover all of the seams with hot glue on the outside. I mean, the outside doesn't have to be pretty, does it? I tested my junky mold in water, added more glue over a leak, and then tested with water again, before reinforcing the whole thing with duct tape because that'll fix it, and then decided I was ready to pour the resin in. Step 5. Procrastination only makes it worse. I was nervous about the Tesseract pour. For one, I had never used resin before this project, and 2, I didn't want to mess up the obviously cool LED gem I made. There was no going back if it didn't work. Finally, after much procrastination, I decided to just go for it. I didn't have a large enough mixing container for the resin, so I sacrificed an old Tupperware container. I mixed up the resin in the container, added a few drops of food coloring. I wanted the cube to be a lighter shade than the gem, so I put my best guesstimating skills to work once more. I wrapped the wire from the space stone around a skewer to keep it in place as I poured the resin in. Then I poured the I'm going to stop myself right here to tell you a short story about mistakes. The first mistake, not having enough resin. Clearly my estimate of the volume was a tad bit off, but we can't do anything about that now, so we move on. Mistake number 2, not stirring or mixing the resin and hardener long enough. I didn't realize until I was watching the footage how little I stirred the resin. This could have prevented the chemical reaction and might be the cause of my issues you'll see ahead. Mistake number 3. Apparently there is something called deep pour resin for thicker pours like this one. My mistake was that I didn't have that kind. Remember earlier when I said I bought the cheapest resin I could find? So yeah, maybe don't do that. And that concludes this short public service announcement. Step 6. Wait, then wait some more. I waited 2 days before attempting to demold my Tesseract, which I already knew wasn't going to be big enough. Nor was it level, but I had a plan for these issues. What I didn't have a plan for was the gooey, uncured state part of the resin was in after 2 days. So I left it 2 more days, and by the time I had pulled the mold completely off, it had been curing for 5 days. And by that time it looked more like something Goose the Flurkin had vomited up. Step 7. Now what? Off camera, I decided to scrape off some of the sticky bits, and when that didn't do much, I introduced my creation to my little friend, the belt sander. As with most of my projects, this was an experiment. I had no idea if the belt sander would remove any of the sticky bits or not, but at this point I was out of options and had nothing to lose. As I placed the almost cube against the sanding belt and the gooey bits started to fly away, I felt a sense of calm I'd not felt in a long time. Could it be the belt sander is my craft therapist? I'm not sure, but I'm beginning to think there isn't a problem it can't fix. Thank you, belt sander. You're the best. Step 8. This program was brought to you by more sanding. After the belt sander cured my crafting blues, my Tesseract was left with some deep sanding marks and cloudiness. I picked up as much wet sandpaper I could find from the hardware store and tried my darndest to remove the scratches and artifacts left from the belt sander. After all, the belt sander didn't mean to do it. He was only trying to help. I started with 400 grit and then 600 grit before finishing with 1000 grit, because that's basically what they had there. While the wet sanding gave me the smooth surface I was looking for, I was still left with a cloudiness on the Tesseract and my soul because this project just seemed to defeat me at every turn. Step 9. The fix. I recalled during my How to Fix Resin Problems research that some people applied Mod Podge to their pieces to help harden them or give them a glossier finish. And I had been smart enough to purchase some gloss Mod Podge from the craft store during my last visit. Since the sanding and literal washing hadn't produced the final result I wanted, I decided to test a small area on the underside of the cube first. While I waited for the Mod Podge to dry, I moved on to making the base. The base would serve 2 purposes, as a stand for the light, but also to hide the fact that my cube wasn't exactly a cube. I grabbed some scrap 2-inch wood and cut 2 pieces to sit underneath the cube to prop it up. Then cut 4 angled side pieces to encase it. I wanted to avoid splitting the wood, so I glued the pieces together and left them to dry overnight. At this point, I checked on the Mod Podge results, and I couldn't believe the effect it had had on the underside of the cube that I hadn't even wet sanded. So I crossed my fingers and painted the gloss Mod Podge over the rest of the cube, testing on one of the sides first before finally investing in my decision. While the Mod Podge didn't create a crystal clear effect, I didn't want that anyway. The Tesseract has a swirled, mystical appearance to it, and I felt the Mod Podge helped me achieve my version of that with the materials I was using. I was so happy my gooey resin mess had turned the very thing I had set out to make. The only thing I had left to do was to sand and stain the stand, which I did. Step 10. It's finished. There is a lesson to be learned here. If life gives you gooey resin, say F that, and then say hello to my belt sander. I hope you enjoyed this crafting adventure and the making of a DIY Resin Tesseract lamp. If you found this video illuminating, click that like button and subscribe. My name is Pam and this is Total Pamarchy, the craft channel with a little anarchy. Until next time, belt sander.